Hello and welcome to the World Built Environment Forum webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hanna Afolabi, founder of Mood and Space and founder of Black Women in Real Estate. And so for today's webinar, we'll be discussing DEI initiatives that have been recognized with the Bisnow Rise Initiative and have made positive impacts in the built environment. We'll be talking about how we can replicate these diversity initiatives to advance equality, equity, diversity and inclusion. And so today we'll be hearing from two organizations who've been recognized through the initiative, who are making a real difference in the way we are changing and setting diversity and inclusion goals, and how they've measured their progress and held themselves accountable. So today I'll pass you on to Farrah and Jen in that order to introduce themselves and their organizations. Farrah? Farrah, I think you're on mute.
Let's try that again. Sorry. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Farrah LaBorde, and I'm the operations manager at Seaforth Land, who are a real estate developer in London.
Thank you, Farrah. Jen?
Hi everyone, this is Jennifer Jones. I head up our learning and development activities in the UK and Ireland cluster for JLL, and so JLL are a global corporate real estate organisation. I apologise in advance, I'm trying to sort my camera issue, so hopefully I'll be with you in a bit, but I'm here with audio. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jen and Farrah. And yeah, so once we get you on camera, Jen, we'll just give you a chance to introduce yourself again. So for today's webinar, please do feel free to submit questions to our panel, as it's really helpful to bring the conversation to life. And we'll be answering and responding to those questions at the end. If you are new to the webinar, you can just submit the questions at any time. So feel free using the question box on your screen. And we'll pick them up as we go through the session, but I think we'll try and keep it towards the end. So on to the really interesting questions that we have for Farrah and Jen today. Farrah, starting with you, can you please share with us the name of your programs and what they are and who was involved in them?
Yeah, of course. So ours is the Seaforth Scholarship Programme, which was actually established in 2021. So we're now in our third year of doing it. The award is basically there to provide financial support to sixth form students who are looking to study at university and further their education within the built environment. It's also there for first year university students who are studying real estate, or at least a transferable course. It was established basically by myself as well as our CEO and founder, Tyler Goodwin, and it's a continual program that keeps running every year, and we work on it throughout the year. Following the actual issuing of the bursary itself, which is £5,000, we look to maintain a relationship with the students themselves and match them with a mentor from within the organisation, in the hopes that we can basically help them with their actual ongoing study and ultimately create a talent pool thereafter. That's our scheme.
Amazing. And Jen, same question.
Thanks. So our program is called JLL Thrive. We've run it, this is the second year we've been running it, and I'm super delighted to share that we'll be running it again next year. And JLL Thrive is a program we've put in place to support the career progression of ethnically underrepresented colleagues at JLL UK and Ireland. And this has really been in line with our strategic business goals of increasing representation and progression of our ethnically underrepresented colleagues in the organisation. We deliver the program in partnership with an external consultancy firm, and the really interesting thing about it is that we treat it as an ecosystem, and by this I mean that the individual joins the program, they're partnered with a sponsor, and their line manager also joined the program. So these three parties basically make up the ecosystem. They go through a series of workshops, coaching circles together, and the sponsee, or the participant, and the sponsor carry out their sponsorship relationship throughout. And the rationale behind having these three parties involved and not just the ethnically underrepresented colleague is really we want to acknowledge that we're not trying to fix any individual, and we want to acknowledge that some of the barriers and some of the challenges related to their progression are systemic. So we really want to work on our culture and the ecosystem which they work in. So I think that's one of the key and innovative things really about this program. It is application based. Those applications are scored blindly, which is another interesting part about it, scored blindly by a diverse panel. And some of the topics they'll be reviewing during the journey in the program will be about career derailers. They get really detailed insight about how to develop a great sponsorship relationship. We talk lots about bias, generating an environment of trust, and also influencing strategies and really things that can support with confidence around networking and progressing into your next steps within an organization. So yeah, really excited about this program, and that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's a very big initiative and program. It sounds like it's a lot of people involved. So I know you both touched on it slightly, but what would you say inspired the organizations to create these, and what did you want out of the program?
So for Seaforth, we were basically inspired by our connection and partnership with Access Aspiration, which is an organisation that's a subgroup of the Mayor's Fund for London. So I think first thing to say is that we're a really small team. There are literally only 12 of us actually in the whole entirety of the organisation. So we're very much aware that we needed help, we needed support, we kind of needed a foot up to actually be able to even get an introduction to students that potentially might need assistance and help. So through our affiliation with them, we were able to work really closely with young people across London, all the boroughs, and encourage them to consider a role within real estate. We actually started really small with them, where we were just doing insight days, where we would have anywhere between 10 to 15 students that would come in on a quarterly basis. And each member of our team would basically have a chat with them, tell them and answer the big question of what is real estate? What are the different avenues that you could go into? We were inspired by actually setting up this particular scheme through actually one of the participants that was there for one of those insight days and ultimately became our first Seaforth scholar. Her name's Karen. And she immediately, when she came for that day, really stood out to all of us because she was just so interested, so curious, lots and lots of questions, took every single person's business card, added us on LinkedIn, and just had loads of involvement thereafter. She wanted to study real estate at Oxford Brookes University, and we were all helping her with her applications, talking her through things, invited her in for a work experience, but then the pandemic basically hit, and both of her parents are shopkeepers, and she really had this internal turmoil basically of whether she'd actually be able to go to university at all, or if she needed to defer at any point so that she could stay and help her parents. We'd already kind of built that emotional side with her, so we were all very invested, and we were thinking, how could we actually help her? And the way we thought about doing it is that we could provide her with some sort of financial support to help her with any of her university studies, whether that's buying books, accommodation, paying off her tuition, anything like that. So we basically started the model based on her, and then thought, actually, this is something that we could actually do on a slightly larger scale and roll it out on an annual basis. So I would say that she was in many ways our inspiration, but it's very much taken on a life of its own. And we've had so much support from Access Aspiration because they work with schools that basically come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So we're able to actually get in front of those pupils that we can actually help. So that's our inspiration, sorry. But on top of that, me myself, being a woman and being in the real estate environment, there's not a lot of representation. There's not a lot of people of color either. And we definitely saw that as an opportunity to lessen that gap and work with people who can actually help us. That's
amazing. Yeah, I also it's amazing that you've named the inception or the genesis of the initiative, and I wonder if Karen even knows how much of an impact she's then had on other people through just being as passionate and excited and enthusiastic about her own aspirations. So yeah, that's a really amazing story. And Jen, I guess a similar question to you. I know you mentioned quite a few things around the organization's aspirations, but what really inspired JLL to take the next step in setting up the initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think this is such a meaningful question. So I think at JLL, we really tend to take a hard look at ourselves. And of course, we've been able to admit that we're not doing great in this space. As many other corporate real estate organizations, we're way behind other industries as it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we know, looking at our data and looking at, how our teams are made up, that we are lagging behind, especially as it comes to race and ethnicity. So as I mentioned before, we've taken a long, hard look at ourselves. We know this is the case. We were ready to admit that was the case. And because of that, it is part of our, business and strategic objectives to do better in this space, which is why we have an array of actions, not just this program, from policies and procedures as well. We have a DE&I team putting a lot of work and thinking in this space. And this program in particular is one of the things that we've done, and it's done great to date, which I'm delighted to say. And to think about, specifically about what is it that we wanted to achieve. So in line with our strategic objectives, it is really about helping individuals from diverse backgrounds progress in the organization. So this is not only, traditionally in moving upwards, so kind of a promotion, it's also moving, horizontally across business lines, thinking about this quite flexibly, right? It's basically supporting each individual to help achieve those growth ambitions that they may have in terms of their career. And so the program has been structured with that in mind, front and center. To really come up with the program in the first place, we of course talked to leadership teams. I consulted with our DE&I team very closely, but we also, held lots of focus groups with. We have a business resource group, or an employee resource group, as they're known in other organizations, which is called Race for Change, which is really about championing initiatives related to race and ethnicity. And we partnered with colleagues in that particular group to really hear from them, what challenges had they experienced, what would be helpful in this space. We consulted with employees from diverse backgrounds at different levels in the organizations. We consulted with different external firms, acknowledging that we didn't have the talent internally required to do something meaningful in this space. So lots of, I would say, work in the discovery or in that research phase of the programming. And really what we aim to achieve is exactly that, to see an impact in employees' career progression. So we do track their progression rates during and after the program. And then we also hope to see a wider organizational or cultural shift. So because we work as an ecosystem, so with those sponsors and line managers involved as well, we also check in with them just to understand, before and after, how has their behavior changed as well? How are they impacting the wider organization for good? And we're really after that ripple effect with all the parties involved to achieve a wider change in our culture and in our organization.
Yeah, and so it sounds like data's played a really big part in setting out in terms of how the initiative is working, if it's going well for your staff as well. How did you embed that in your program, and why was it really important for you to have data as part of and I guess the feedback loop as part of the initiative?
Absolutely. And here, we love data, right? And I think one of the key things, and especially because it is a talent and development program, we often think what the work we do is a bit fluffy or a bit soft. It often is very difficult to measure. But I think with this program in particular, we were very keen to use data in a robust way. And I think, why that's hugely important and why it's been hugely important in the process is that we don't want this program to be about, hearsay or what people feel or what they think. It is really about the hard facts and being able to evidence with the data that this is a challenge that is real. It's not just someone's opinion. And so as I mentioned, in part of the discovery phase, we looked at our organizational data. We looked at how different employee groups within the organization behave, what rates of progression they have, what rates of turnover they have, how they are rated in terms of performance, for instance. And we compared those data sets, if someone's ethnically underrepresented, if someone is of another ethnic background, what are those differences in contrast? And we saw that there clearly was one, which again gives us that rationale to move forward with this work and to really, I think it really gave us a sound business case around why we should do this. And it is a reality. It's not anyone's opinion that we need to influence change in this particular area. And then as we started working on the program, we had this clarity that we wanted to measure progression in particular. So throughout the program, we've stayed really close to our participants or our sponsees to understand how they've been shifting, how they've been learning, what they've been doing during their time in the program, and we've captured any career changes throughout. Once the program finishes, we also check in with them once a month for 6 more months. And that's a great opportunity to learn more, because obviously, with career progression, it's not like you do some training and bam, you have a new role. Sometimes it takes time. So that's why we follow up with them 6 months after, just so we have a 12-month picture. And we've also committed to kind of pull our data 6 months after that, so at the 18-month mark, because it is really those longer-term milestones we're after. So that's one thing. And we have seen a shift, especially with the first cohort. We've seen 30% of our participants have been able to achieve a career shift within the organization, which is great news. And those check-ins that we do with our participants have been really meaningful, because in addition to tangible actual job changes, we've also seen great shifts in terms of confidence, or people really excelling in their current roles and finding opportunities for great stretch assignments, or to innovate in areas where maybe they wouldn't have done so before, but now they have this new confidence and sponsorship from senior leaders, etc., and they're achieving so much. So there are some indirect kind of great news stories, if you will, within that as well. And as we start, and then obviously, as with any program, we've also done pre and post program surveys, just to understand what the experience was like as well, and to start getting a sense of what some of the behavioral shifts, like the before and after in terms of confidence, for example, have been for all 3 parties involved. And now, as we think about our 3rd cohort, which we will be launching in 2024, we are also starting to think, how do we more tangibly measure the impact for sponsors and line managers as well, for example, so the impact they'll be able to make after they leave the program. We have some survey results, but we'd like organizational data there as well to help us inform the impact as well.
Amazing. So a lot of data collection and a lot of learning as well. And I guess, you're embedding that back into the program. Before I move on with the question, I just want to remind the attendees that they can leave questions in the on the question mark on their page. On their screen, sorry. So feel free to do that as and when we're going through. We'll collect all of the questions at the end and reply to any of them that you do have. But yeah, moving on, Farrah, how would you say you went about establishing your programs and how you measured success?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, we're a very small team, so we very much had that question of where do we get started, because it's very much a big ticket topic of how can we make a change with diversity and inclusion, because, as everyone knows, it is a problem that we need to tackle, not only as individuals, but as a collective industry as a whole. So as I mentioned previously, we made a partnership with Access Aspiration, mainly because we thought we can start small and take off small bits, learn from what we were doing, and then gradually build up to it. They partner with state schools, as I mentioned, how they basically actually get into those particular schools and select which ones they're going to work with. It's based on the pupils that receive the premium package, which is support from the government itself. So we basically made a partnership with them and asked them how to get started. We asked for advice from the get-go when it came to starting that scholarship program, and started taking surveys at the end of our Insight days with the students themselves, asking them, you know, is this something that they would actually be interested in? Is this something that they would actually apply for? Do they know that this is something that is out there and available to them? Because I know that not very many companies are doing it. It almost seems like a slightly more North American scheme, having scholarship programs as opposed to in Europe. Basically gaining their feedback, gaining what types of questions they think they should be asked, in addition to obviously what types of questions we would like to ask, to make sure that they are serious and interested in that further educational piece. Also, I think one of the biggest things I have to stress is that it really was a top-down approach for us. Our CEO is so heavily involved in it, and it's something that he truly believes in, which very much meant that the rest of the team really rallied around it, and it became something that was achievable and that we all had a say in and we could actually support. How we basically have measured the success has been basically looking at the amount of applicants that we've been having and creating that full feedback loop. So we obviously started the first year by giving it, as I mentioned, to the first recipient, Karen. So there was no application process there. The second round of it, which was last year, we looked at different ways to advertise it, and ended up only actually having a smaller group of applicants that actually came through, which actually ended up going up to 6 applicants, which I know isn't a lot, but considering that realistically that was the first year that we'd actually rolled it out to a wider group of people, we saw that still as a success. From there, though, we very much went back to the drawing board and started looking at the types of questions we were asking, how it was formatted, looking again at the data of were students logging in via their mobile phones, their tablets, their laptops? Did they have access to certain devices in order to complete these forms? Were we even launching it during the right time of the year? So we were kind of looking at that, and this year it has increased. Now we've had 25 applicants instead, and the quality of applications and the drop-off rate has dramatically diminished, and the quality has obviously increased as well. So I would say that in itself is a huge success, and also just genuinely seeing the rest of the team really get behind it has been a huge success. Our ultimate goal is to create a talent pool where we hire from these people that we have seen through the entire process, to actually break down that barrier and have diversity and inclusion within our own workforce. So I would say that's how we manage our success and how we kind of got started.
And how important is it for the team as well to know the individuals personally?
Well, obviously you can't get to know all of the applicants all the way through. I myself basically, I mean, at the moment it's still quite a small group that we're having that actually apply. So 25 people, I'm still able to actually reach out to every one of those applicants, thanking them personally, arranging phone calls, seeing how we can support them in different ways. It may not be the bursary itself, but, you know, inviting them in for those work experiences and etc. But for the team themselves, one of the things I know that they really enjoy is that mentoring connection that we establish between the students and them themselves. I think it's one of those things where it's almost reawakened their enjoyment and their fulfillment within their roles, because we do the same jobs over and over again on a day-to-day basis, but it's almost like sometimes we can forget why we love real estate and how we can actually help someone. And just by, you know, on the most basic level, I think of my colleague who's the CFO, having a chat with someone who's starting out their career in finance and looking to branch into real estate finance. You can see how he comes away having spoken about something that he's dedicated his life to and he's so passionate about. And he's also come away saying that he's learnt a few things. You know, these students, even if they don't go into real estate and ultimately get absorbed within the sector itself, there are future tenants, they're future homeowners. You're teaching them a life skill, even if it's just they come away understanding what a mortgage is. So that in itself is hugely rewarding for everyone involved. And even, for example, with this webinar or going to the Rise honoree, the whole team came because it's very much everyone is so involved in it and feels very much like their say matters. So they all read the applications that come in, and well, I narrow it down to top 3, but they're all heavily invested in that.
Amazing. And so just moving on then, what impact have your programs had both on taking part and your organization as a whole? And Farrah, I know you kind of like just spoke a little bit about it, but has it improved anything significantly in terms of your organization's diversity and inclusion?
Well, at the moment, it's still a very small organization and it's such a young program. So our idea is to have this talent pool that we can draw from. So the intention is to have individuals that go to university and that we can actually end up hiring, or at least mentoring so that they get a role and we can ultimately work with them in the future. I think the biggest one is that these students who have grown up potentially with financial burdens and financial worries and are entering adulthood with that on their backs can kind of go and focus on what is important to them and the matter at hand, which is the course at hand. And they don't have to think about, you know, helping their families. They don't have to think about, oh, I'm not entirely sure where, you know, if I'm going to be able to afford these books, or if I'm going to be able to go on these abroad trips if they need to, or anything kind of like that. It's also more than that. We try and create a network for them. So real estate in general all comes from, you know, having a network, and more often than not, people of old have been able to get into it through who you know, the types of universities you've been to, and that kind of almost like a club. These individuals don't have that, so we try and make it our real mission that we invite them to any events that we host, any kind of networking, socializing. We have a summer and a winter party. We have, you know, building launches. They are there for those, making those connections. And I think, again, from the successful side of things for these students, last year's recipient has so far already had follow-up internships with both GPE and Savills, which is fantastic. We write them their references. I know Tyler himself has made, with these students, he really backs them. He's made personal phone calls. So it is kind of creating that network around them so that, you know, that they are the future. We're giving them that helping hand and that step up where they may not have had that previously. So that's one of the, I think, the biggest impacts to them, not only the financial aid of it and the stress relief, but also the fact that they are building a community and a network. We also put them in touch with each other. And the groups that do apply, we do ask, obviously, their permission first, but we do share their details with each other so that they can support. And when we actually do the following year's applications, we involve last year's winner in the selection itself and put them in touch as well so that they can share their learned experience.
Like, so creating a community as well of alumni, of people who have gone through the application process. That's amazing. And so, Jen, what would you say the impact has had on your organisation?
Thank you.
Both of those taking part and your organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's exactly that. So there's been benefits across the board in terms of this program. So from an individual perspective, of course, they're really looking forward to advance their careers. As I shared before, our data shows that they have, and we've heard their stories, which have been hugely impactful and inspiring. So that's been one thing. They've also reported, you know, feeling increased levels of confidence and really gaining that clarity around what is it that they would like to do with their careers and where they'd like to take their careers moving forward, which to me is maybe something that we cannot necessarily measure, but is definitely a win and a step in the right direction there from an individual perspective. We also have heard the sponsors and line managers share that they've taken the learnings and ran with them in terms of applying with their wider teams, which again is this ripple effect we're really hoping to achieve throughout the organization. and has been great, and will, as I mentioned, be looking forward to seeing how we can further measure or further influence that particular side of things. And I think as an organization as well, there's been a buzz around the program. It has helped us, challenge our mindset and how we think about careers, what kind of programs we can put in place. It has helped us ask ourselves tough questions, which we've had to do and had to work through the answers and how to figure some of these things out. And I think even from a program perspective, I'm, delighted to share that having done this program in the UK and with and this year we've done it in Ireland as well as a joint, and with the results it's also inspired our thinking globally for us as a from our learning and development perspective. And now, for instance, we're piloting similar concepts globally as well, which I'm really excited because, again, it's starting small in this particular cluster in the UK and Ireland, but with us being a global organization, it has been amazing to see that, this work can inspire global impact as well. And it'll be really interesting to see how those programs pilot and what the impact there is. But yeah, just some quick elements from me around the impact. I think we'll still want to learn and assess from it, but I think we've gotten off to a great start.
Amazing. It's also amazing that it can be replicated in other countries internationally. Absolutely. As well. Yeah, that is a great social impact more broadly than just the UK. And so, Farrah, what would you say some of the challenges you encountered were along the way, and how did you guys deal with it?
I think our biggest challenge was basically getting eyes on the program and having young people actually know that it existed. So how do we reach those people? And that was the biggest challenge and also our biggest question. So we leveraged obviously the connections that we already made with certain organizations and looked to try and make new ones. So we are now attending all of the summer presentations for the Henley Business School summer school program, and basically we've joined the panel of the industry professionals that can provide support for those young people that are finishing those that summer school program. We go to see their presentations, we give them feedback, etc. And there's also a networking opportunity thereafter, so that we can actually talk about our own schemes, programs, let them know a little bit about the organizations, the types of jobs that are out there. Also made affiliations with the university itself, so they advertise our scheme now on their website, and they also send that out to the students who attend the summer school, so the alumni from the year before as well as the ones that are doing it currently. The Mayor's Fund for London have been so kind throughout our partnership with them and are also featuring that on their website. We also now look at LinkedIn posts and just hopefully word of mouth through our team actually going out there and being confident and comfortable to speak about it with people that they're meeting. So that's kind of how we've overcome that. I mean, we're nowhere near where we would like to be with it, but it's a huge change year on year, considering where we actually started at the very beginning. I think in general also what we found to be an issue at the very beginning was actually how we structured the types of questions. I mean, it's been a long time since I was 17 and looking to make these applications. So very much having to put yourself in their shoes and consider what their priorities are at any given stage of their lives. They're obviously applying to university, and that takes absolute precedence over all else. There are A-levels and there's applications. So this is yet another application that they have to fill out. So we had to try and make it as digestible as possible and not feel as if they're writing, yet another 2,000-word essay on proving themselves. So they've been through UCAS, they've been through all of that. So we had to we went back to the source, to them, and said, this is basically what we're trying to achieve. And these were the students that came to the Insight Day. And we did it over the course of the whole year. So we had 4 test groups. And we said, this is what we're hoping to achieve. These are the types of individuals who are yourselves that we are looking to target. how should we structure these questions? Because, you know, they're not silly, they're not stupid, they know what they want, and why shouldn't we just be able to ask them how we can help them? We don't want to patronize them or give them something that they don't want or they won't use, and we want to make sure that it's actually making a difference. So we did it in that kind of structure, in that way. And I think also just kind of admitting when we're a little bit overwhelmed by something or needing help, and going to the teachers in the schools and saying, you know, when are your busy periods with academia? Do you think it would actually be feasible if we actually asked them to apply for this over the summer, for example? Will there be uptake? And kind of taking it from there. So we also, as I mentioned, made a connection with the Henley Business School, and their course leaders were incredibly helpful with guiding us through that process as well. So lots of challenges, and I'm sure there'll be lots more to come, but so far those are the ones that we've encountered.
Yeah, but it sounds like you've taken the right steps to deal with them, and I think asking the students questions and about the timing of the application is very considerate for the outcome of the program to be as impactful as possible. So yeah, that is amazing. We're coming quite quickly towards the end of the panel questions, so we have a couple left. I just want to continue to encourage the attendees to please keep asking questions in the chat function within the screen. On to the next question, and Jen, I'll start with you, and Farrah, I'll come back around to you and ask you the same question. What were some of the activities or initiatives that your organisations had to run alongside your specific initiatives that you were Rise honorees for, and how did it support the creation of inclusion and equity in your organisations? And will you continue those programs in the future alongside alongside the current initiatives that you have been recognised for?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, so this question I feel is quite key, because any meaningful change has to, be quite wide. So we can't rely on one sole program, to help us fix something, or one policy to help us be better at it. It typically, in my experience, is an array of solutions, policies, procedures, really looking at things holistically, that helps us achieve any kind of meaningful change, really. So I think from our perspective, I'm obviously best placed to talk about what we do from a learning and talent and development perspective. But I'll start with some elements that perhaps are a bit outside of my scope, but we definitely do a lot of work from a policy and procedure perspective. We also have employee resource groups, which I've mentioned before, which are great spaces to allow employees to take charge of certain topics that they feel passionate about and help us drive meaningful action on the ground. We've also run campaigns to really help with our data disclosure as well. So, and this is any characteristic. And as I said before, the more data we have, the more transparent it is, the better, or the better informed our actions can be, and the more robust the plans we put in place will be. So that's a key element we continue to work on. And then perhaps from a talent and learning perspective, as employees join the organization, they do have learning that they complete as part of their kind of mandatory pack, so which is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So from the beginning, we're setting the tone that this is something that's very important to us. We also deliver manager training in this space, really to set an inclusive environment and an inclusive culture, a culture of trust and feedback as well. We are currently running senior leader training as well to help some of these senior leaders, one, recognize the challenges, also to help them challenge any poor behavior and to be really an ally, and to shift from perhaps being a bystander to being an active, to taking an active role in disrupting anything that we consider poor behavior. So that's currently ongoing alongside this program, for instance, as well. As I've mentioned, we have many senior leaders as part of this program as well in their role as sponsor, so that has been really beneficial. And then as we look at our data, which we do on a recurring basis, we know there are biases in how employees are rated within certain groups. So, for instance, we've had quite robust training around bias in some of our key processes, which would be around talent review and performance management. That's now embedded as a standard, as something that we focus on to help those managers and leaders make objective and unbiased decisions as much as possible. So those are some of the key things that we have on an ongoing basis within our organization and are part of our culture.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of a lot of other initiatives going on in the background to support the work that you're doing. And how is it that you're integrating all of these together?
Well, I think then that's the thing, they're part of our culture. So for instance, I'll give you an example. Sometimes we do have to roll out manager training that is specific about the E&I, but what we often like doing is any training maybe starts with an inclusion moment, right? So this is really about bringing the E&I to the forefront. So in anything that we're doing, we should do it inclusively. And I think that's our bold statement that we like making. And this would apply to, you know, as we rate, for example, our performance principles are about what you're being rated about, but also how you're undertaking those actions. So if you, you know, aced your sales goals, but you did so in an uninclusive way, your rating's not going to be great, right? Because we're recognizing that to do well and to excel, you need to be, you know, every individual should be really role modeling those elements of inclusion. So I think it sounds like a lot, but we find ways of embedding. Some may be standalone programs, but I think the key thing that I feel is quite successful is embedding inclusion in initiatives that are already existing.
Amazing. That's really great. And so Farrah, same question. How are you doing that at Seaforth?
So in addition to what I've mentioned previously, like the insight data we also do work experiences, which are on shorter terms. So that's like a week to 2 weeks. And those would probably be more for the sixth form students that don't really have the background in real estate just yet. So they are just looking for a taster and a sampler. We do summer internships. We also do CV workshops where we actually go to schools themselves and actually sit and assist as best we can. We've done assemblies as well to kind of do a broad brush introduction as to what is real estate. As I mentioned, we also have the mentorship scheme that then follows on from the scholarship program itself. So we're not just giving the money to the students, we're also making sure that they have the support thereafter, the networking opportunities. Similar to Jen as well and her team, we have diversity, inclusion and bias training as well for all employees. That is mandatory. And we're trying our hardest to make sure that everyone is aware and as conscious as they possibly can, but also looking to get out into the community more and create an environment. As a real estate developer, it is our responsibility to create an environment where no one feels excluded, where London isn't off limits to the people that live in London, for example. I think one of the biggest things is when we speak to some of these students in our insight days and, you know, talk about, for example, some of the buildings that we own and have developed, and they say, oh yeah, I don't live far from that building. I walk past that building all the time, but I didn't know what it was. And it suddenly really kind of hits home that, you know, we don't want to create an environment where they feel as if this isn't for them, this built environment isn't created for them ultimately. It is for the people that live in the area. So trying to break down that gap slowly, and hopefully by going into schools and starting from young is how we're hoping that our scheme can really take hold.
Amazing. I think the point about, you know, London and development being accessible for Londoners living in London is such a powerful point, and I guess it goes to the heart of your initiative as well. And so just the final question to you, Farrah, and then Jen. How can organisations with little to no funding get involved and help create equitable opportunities for all professionals and build an inclusive built environment sector representative of London, like you said, or of our society, wherever it is. So I'm sure the audience are from all over the UK and further afield, and is having little to no funding, an excuse to do nothing. Yeah. So yeah, over to you, Farrah.
In my opinion, no, it isn't an excuse not to do anything. As I mentioned from the very beginning, we're such a small company, a really small team. We're actually only 7 years old. And I think it's really important to know that the real estate industry is so wide and so big, and it's no longer about being a competitor or anything like that. This is the only way schemes can work and we can actually make a real difference when it comes to diversity and inclusion, is actually realizing that there is a systemic problem, and the only way that we can change that is by working together. For us, for example, we don't have a large D&I team. We don't have, you know, any of those what you'd see in a larger organization, like the large team of support. So we were just basically asking for help. We were like, we know that there's a problem. We want to do something about it. Let's do some research and see what schemes are already out there that not even that we could piggyback on, but we can learn from and look to see if there's a way in that we can actually do our own thing. Or if something is already established, how can we help? How can we add funding? How could we add another idea, time, anything like that? So I think it's less even about the money. It can also be about the time that you give. Before we actually had the bursary set up, as I mentioned, some of our senior leaders would go and spend an hour in a school doing a CV workshop, and they would do that on their lunch break, or they would go, you know, at 3 o'clock towards the end of the school day ending, when the schools would actually have those bits set up. But I would say, I know I've spoken about them throughout. They really did help us through the beginning. It was Access Aspiration, but I know that there are lots of other organizations out there that can help and can bridge that gap between the organization and the people that are actually in need, to actually help with that.
Amazing. And Jen, what would you say about organizations with little to no funding?
I'd agree. It's definitely not an excuse. And I think it's more about, one, admitting when there's something that we could be doing better. That's a great starting point. And then just really thinking a bit more creatively, perhaps. So, for example, if there is no budget or the team is small, and you know you're interested in doing something similar to, for example, the program that I've presented, you can definitely look at that and understand, you know, what can I learn from that? What has worked well, and what elements could I run with without budget? So because sponsorship, for instance, is a key part of JLL Thrive, and we also know, you know, there's so much research suggesting that sponsorship is one of the key kind of learning tools you can put in place to support career progression, for example, more so than mentoring, for instance, but even mentoring could be interesting. All of those helping relationships can be done with no investment. So all you need is participants who are willing to put in some of their time. You need leaders who are willing to put in some of their time to be sponsors, or any other role you have in the organization you feel could be a sponsor, for instance. And then perhaps, you know, whether it is a team that can, you know, form as a project team for this and dedicate some extra discretional time to research, you know, best practices in the space, etc., and to set up the relationships so that they can be successful, then you can launch something meaningful. And I'd say the other thing, that's one, maybe starting with what you can do, and not looking at, you know, something that's massive and just saying, oh, I cannot do exactly that. You know, always reframe and think, what could you do? And then also, I think the really important thing is starting somewhere. And it doesn't matter how small that starting place or that starting point is, it's always going to be better than nothing. So that would be one of the key takeaways, I think, for me, is doing something is always better than doing nothing. And you can always build and learn once you've implemented that small something, and you can scale it and you can improve it and you can evolve it. So those would be my 2 pieces of advice. Start small, perhaps, and then be creative and focus on the things that you can do with the resource you have.
That is amazing. I think it's a kind of a lovely way to wrap up the discussion as well. It's start with where you are, Jen, and then Farrah, it was find your partners and find people who have already done it and learn from them. Which hopefully the attendees can take away as where they're looking at their own diversity and inclusion. We are now opening the floor for questions, and we do have one audience question so far, but encouraging others to please submit theirs also. So Jen, the first question is actually for yourself. Have you had any challenges with the response rate for employee data? And how has JLL encouraged and improved disclosure rates to drive these amazing initiatives you've mentioned?
Yes, so unfortunately, the answer is yes, it has been challenging. But I think we've looked at it from the perspective of let's not be frustrated by the fact that it's challenging. And sometimes when something is a challenge, that almost gives you information in itself. So what we've done is also trying to understand why it's challenging. So by providing their, because I've provided my employee information as well. So as I provide that, what reservations have I had? What reservations do others have? And what is in their mind as they perhaps decide not to provide that data? I think having a bit of an understanding around what those concerns may be is really important, because that can then help you communicate what is it that you need the information for. So we've launched different campaigns, mostly over email, over town halls as well. And generally these messages they don't come from HR, they'll come from our senior leadership. So I think the sponsorship this message and endorsement of this disclosure information being important, it's really great when it comes from senior leaders or managers, even, because employees tend to respond positively to those leaders, as opposed to if like HR were asking you to do it, for example. So I think that's one piece, is like get senior leader engagement in running with that message, and also in clearly articulating why it's important. And I think many times we ask people to do things, but we don't necessarily say why and what the impact of that will be. So perhaps articulating that it will help us make better decisions that will impact employee experience in the long run. It will help us really tailor some of our programming policies and actions that we take to make life more meaningful and interesting work life, I shall say, for employees. So again, is where all that information can help you in articulating clear rationale around why we're asking and how we'll use this data, so that people can maybe gain that confidence that they're not going to be negatively impacted by disclosing that information, which is something that, and I think understandably is in people's minds as they get these requests. So those are some things we've done, just to summarize, because I know I've talked a bit broadly, but having messaging coming from senior leaders and managers within the organization, and really clarifying why we're asking and what the information will be used for, which is meaningful change.
Amazing. So yeah, thank you to the attendee for asking that question. The other question that we also have for you, Jen, is knowing the difference between sponsorship and mentorship is really important. Can you clarify what the difference is for a wider understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, I would class them both as learning relationships or helping relationships. They're relationships in which both parties actually gain something from each other, whether it is mentor and mentee, sponsor and sponsee. It's not that one side gets everything. Often this is a misconception that either sponsor or sponsee or mentee gain everything and the other party does not. Both actually learn from the process. But if we look at them separately, so mentorship is more about, typically your mentor would be someone who's more experienced in a particular field. Doesn't necessarily mean they're more senior organizationally, it's just that they're more experienced in a particular area of interest for the mentee. And their role is really to provide advice, share their experience. And if we think about careers, for instance, it may be about how they have tackled their progression in the past, things they've done, their experience in terms of what they've studied, how they have progress within the organization, this kind of thing. So it's more about advice and sharing experience. As we think about sponsorship, I think one of the key differences is there may be elements of mentorship in terms of, you know, sharing experience, advice, etc. But it is really a more active role. So the sponsor takes a more active role in bringing opportunities to the sponsee once their goals have been clarified, because and in this case, in our case, for instance, the sponsor is a senior leader, so they have a broader understanding of the organization and of teams that we have within a company, right? So maybe the sponsee is thinking like, oh, I'd love to progress in this direction, but they, because of their level in the organization, they may not be aware that some opportunities exist. So because the sponsor now knows that, they can say like, hey, actually, I know that in this team, there is this opportunity. Why don't you talk to this person? So it's quite concrete advice. And they're basically using their organizational awareness and knowledge to unlock opportunities for the sponsee, which they wouldn't have access to before without that relationship. Another example would be that they use their own network, the sponsor's own network, to again help the sponsee progress in a direction that they like. So maybe they have quite a wide organizational, so internal network, but maybe external network as well in any kind of partners or anything that could be interesting. So once they know what the sponsee's goals are, equally they can share key contacts within their network that can help the sponsee gain those opportunities in a way that they wouldn't have done so before. So it's really about more of an action-focused relationship, one that's geared toward achieving the sponsee's results in partnership, and one that is about, in our case, because we're talking progression, about helping them find those next steps in a concrete way. So it's not just advice, it's action. So I connect you with this person, I share this opportunity with you, I bring you into a meeting that I'm having with a client that I think you'd benefit from gaining exposure to, for example. So just some examples there. Hope that clarifies.
Yeah, I think that was really detailed and clear response for me. So hopefully it does respond to the question from the audience. So we've come to the end of the questions, and I just want to really thank you, Farrah and Jen, for such an insightful and detailed responses to the questions. I know it was helpful for me to learn more about your organizations and the initiatives in a little bit more detail, but also yeah, I just think it's so amazing what the work that you're doing and the impact it's having on the industry and the people's lives. So I guess the keep up the great work. So just a reminder that we will be publishing a recording and written summary of the webinar online. So do feel free to share with those within your professional networks. And so that's for everyone in the audience and everyone who's attended. And please take a few moments to let us know what your thoughts of the session were today. So you can complete an online poll, which will appear on your screens at the end of the webinar. And just to advise of future webinars and conferences, the recording of previous webinars are also available online. So take a look at the podcast series and have a listen and tell us what you think. And then you could follow, yeah, so on the screen, you should see on the screen the next webinar and the Europe conference. And then you could also follow on Instagram and LinkedIn. So that's also should have come up on your screen. If you're interested to find out a bit more, you can receive news of upcoming webinars and catch up on any webinars that you might have missed. And so until next time, we want to thank you again for your time today. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you all so much. Goodbye.